Welcome to Green Vespers. Our monthly service is dedicated to seeking right relationship with Earth. Reverend Emily and I are here hoping and wishing that you could be here, and maybe you will be next month. We center on the seventh principle of Unitarian Universalism, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And we're going to open, as we always do, with some familiar words.
Out of the vessel of darkness comes light.
Let ours be a living faith. Let ours be a living chalice.
Out of the vessel of earth comes water.
Let ours be a living faith. Let ours be a living chalice.
Out of the water of earth come the vessels of life.
Let ours be a living faith. Let ours be a living chalice.
As we greet new growth,
let ours be a living faith. Let ours be a living chalice. A chalice can hold many things. If it usually holds fire, let the evening chalice hold this quenching water. Water that sinks to common depths to connect everything it touches. Water whose quiet insistence can sculpt great canyons. Water that transforms, heals, and refreshes, that gives life. Let this water soothe our daytime stress. Our theme for this evening is liberating limits, and part one is about having it all. Do you associate childhood with freedom, early childhood? I do. It seems that we're born hungry for it, and yet from the get-go, we confront a world of no, of grown-ups stopping us from doing and having what we want, and for reasons that we can't understand. Meanwhile, they get to do everything that they want, and they get everything that they want to have. How come, right? It's just not fair. It reminds me of this movie based on an E.M. Forster novel called Where Angels Fear to Tread. You might know the movie, and maybe you've read the book. In it, an English widow who's vacationing in Italy meets a much younger man, and she falls for him. He and his country represent an exhilarating promise of release from the constraints of the English culture that has governed her life to this point. Unfortunately, when she marries him, she confronts the constraints of an Italian culture that will govern her life thereafter. While being in Italy may have freed her from familiar limits, like us as small children, her feeling of freedom owed more to her ignorance of the rules than the absence of them. There are always limits. And still, we live in a culture that encourages us to believe there aren't, that encourages us to fantasize that absolute freedom is possible, say in some remote place like a wilderness or a jungle, maybe even outer space. But there too, a little reflection tells us that we are mistaken. Inviolable patterns of behavior and invisible maps of territories govern wildernesses and jungles. To survive, you better know them. And although we like to say the sky's the limit, meaning if we're clever enough, anything is possible, even the stars must obey nature's laws. There is no existing, let alone living, without limits. Yet this illusion of absolute freedom supports our de facto religion, the one that constrains us regardless of what religion we profess, the one we call the economy. And few places pander to this illusion more completely than the supermarket. So let's go there, shall we? And let's see how liberating it is.
What is this?
That's cheese.
And this, what is this?
Cheese also.
And what is this one?
That's cheese.
This one over here, what is it?
Cheese.
And this?
That's cheese.
And this?
Cheese.
And this?
Cheese.
And what is this? Is it coffee? Is this a rice?
That's cheese also.
And this is a rice?
That's cheese also.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
And what is this?
Cheese also.
And this one here is a rice?
That's cheese.
And this is?
Cheese.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
And what is
That's
this?
cheese.
What is this?
That's cheese.
And what is this?
Cheese.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
And what is?
Cheese.
And this here?
Yes, sir. All of this is cheese. From top to
What
bottom.
about this? This cannot be cheese.
All of this is cheese.
And what about this?
Cheese.
This one here?
Cheese.
What about this?
Cheese.
What is this thing here?
That's cheese.
What is this? A potato?
Cheese.
Is this a milk?
That's cheese.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
What is this?
That'll be horseradish.
And what is this?
That's also cheese.
And this?
Cheese.
And this?
Cheese.
But it's a crackers.
Cracker Barrel, that's just the brand. Brand name. That's cheese.
And what is this?
Cheese.
And what is this?
Cheese.
This is a butter.
No, that's cheese.
This is a rock.
That's cheese.
And what of this?
Also cheese. Parmesan cheese.
It is not a pen.
Cheese.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
What is this? It is a papers.
Sliced cheese.
And what is this?
That's cheese.
And what is this?
Cheese.
And what of this?
That's cheese.
This is a paper.
Cheese.
This is must be wood.
Cheese.
This?
Cheese also.
This is also a cheese. Why do American people only eat the cheese?
They don't. You got a whole store.
What is this?
Butter.
What is this?
All this is butter here. Butter and margarine.
And this one?
That's butter also.
And what is this?
That's butter also. Butter starts.
And what is this?
All this is butter all the way over.
What is this one?
That's butter.
And what is this?
That's butter also.
And what is this?
That's butter.
And what is this?
That's butter.
And this?
Butter also.
And what is this?
That's butter.
And what is this?
Butter.
And what is this?
That's butter.
And what is this?
Butter also.
And what about this?
Milk.
What is this?
Milk.
Don't you just love that store manager? The way he reacts with patience and kindness to this relentless and I would say even cruel questioning. And if he's a Catholic, I think we should canonize him. Now, we hear early and often that ours is a country conceived in liberty. That is, a country conceived to free us from coercion. Is that what we just saw? In the cheese aisle, on Amazon, in emails, on websites, just to name a few things, we are running an endless gauntlet of baited hooks. And the illusion that we can have whatever we want has turned us into prey. This is coercion masquerading as freedom. A while back, I changed my diet. I committed to vegetarianism. I gave up processed sugar, other processed foods, coffee. I vowed to buy organic produce whenever possible, with the result that it freed me from huge sections of the supermarket. So knowing and choosing my limits freed me. Years ago, Lily Tomlin summed it up in a one-woman show on Broadway. And in one of her skits, she played a woman from her college years through middle age. And she marched, she protested, she fell in love, she got married, she bought a house, she cleaned it, she had children, she ran around all over finding organic peanuts and ground peanut butter for them, she chauffeured them, she tended an organic garden, she volunteered for worthy causes. And finally, she threw herself on a park bench, put the back of her hand to her forehead and said, "If I had known what it was like to have it all, I would have settled for less." We have reached Liberating Limits Part 2, The Spirit of Life. When have you felt the freest? When I asked myself that, it brought me back to an intensive week that I spent making a Byzantine Russian icon. I learned just a bit about it. And in brief, and now if you can imagine this, I, a closeted unbeliever in a classroom full of committed Christians, I, who cannot even sing the word God here at Beacon, began every day for 7 days praying to the Trinity. And I, every day for 7 days, followed the laborious, rigid, elaborate, and repetitive steps of an antique tradition, not my own. And how did that feel? Liberating, exhilarating, delightful. I never felt freer than when I was most constrained. So is freedom itself then an illusion? It was about 10 days ago, I heard a story by Shamita Basu, and she was interviewing Brian Velasquez. He's a New Yorker who's blind, and he navigates the city exuberantly, confidently, despite his blindness, even going through the subways all by himself. And he began training to do this when he was in high school. For years, he learned the route to the school inch by inch. And here's what he said about walking there by himself for the first time. "I felt such a relief. I got to school not too early, not too late. I felt free. I felt like myself, like a grown person, a grown-up." I believe Velasquez. I believe that the freedom that he experienced is not an illusion, it's real. And how did he achieve it? Not by freeing himself from what constrains him, but by mastering it. Remember, he learned that route inch by inch. And that's very similar to what happened to us in the icon class. Just as an intimate knowledge of the route freed Velasquez, our teacher's intimate knowledge of making icons freed us. We could relax, confident in his support, confident that once we had learned the route inch by inch, we too could follow it without him. Both the Velasquez story and the icon story point to the idea that freedom begins with safety. And that makes sense, because how can you feel free in a dangerous place? Yet safety alone doesn't seem like enough. Safety alone becomes confinement. And that makes me think about my own work and what perennially interests me: the setting and breaking of rules. I like to make rules and break them. Or really, maybe a better way to put it is, I like to look for and create permeable boundaries, boundaries that you can safely cross. For instance, I'd like you to take a look at this quilt. It's called "Eternity is in Love with the Productions of Time." That's a quote from William Blake. You can see that on the top and left, you have set boundaries, that familiar rectangle you think of when someone says quilt. And on the top, on the bottom and the right, you see a figure breaking out of and emerging from those boundaries. And this brings me back to the tree that introduces green vespers, the one you saw at the beginning, the one that's on our order of service. That tree of life anchors us even as its branches reach out to extend life's boundaries. And it brings me back to one of our favorite hymns, Spirit of Life. Roots hold me close, wings set me free, it tells us. Just as birds fly from and alight on the same branches of the same rooted trees, freedom calls for both roots and wings. Places of connection, places of relative safety from which we can take flight and return. I would say that reverence for life's permeable, evolving boundaries sets us free. That's the great Webb's model of freedom, a freedom within necessary limits, the only freedom that always has and always will sustain us.
As we enter into a time of meditation, I invite you to sit quietly wherever you are, to rid yourself of the distractions that are happening all around you. Maybe to sit with your hands on your lap, palms open or closed, whatever feels most comfortable. And to breathe deeply in through your nose and out through your mouth. You can feel as you breathe in and out that different points of tension might be released. Sometimes I forget that I'm holding my breath, and a deep cleansing breath just invites me to let go and to remember to breathe. As we breathe in and out, I invite you to bring to mind a favorite place in nature. It can be a place you like to go, maybe somewhere around where you live. It can even be a look out your window to a point in the distance. Maybe it's a trail in the woods that leads you to a waterfall or a stream. Maybe it's a river that you have canoed down. It could even be the ocean at sunset. No matter where your favorite place in nature is to go, go there now in your mind. And now I invite you to focus on one particular place in that place itself. Feel the one aspect that keeps bringing you back there. It might be the way that the wind rips through the trees, or the sound of the waves crashing down on the sand. It could be the way that the light reflects at different points in the day. Whatever that one aspect is, focus in on it. In your mind, I invite you to enlarge that one aspect. And I invite you to enter into it so that you are becoming the wind, the waves, the light. You're letting go of your physical form and you are turning into that blade of grass, that leaf, that drop of water. Let the natural world give you the freedom from being the you that you inhabit every day. And allow it to liberate you. To be another for just one moment. Breathing slowly. Let what you love about this place, let it teach you how you too are like the wind, how you are like the water, how each one of us is a part of another, each and all woven together. Whenever the days get hard, whenever the hours ahead get anxious, return to this place. Return to being some part of the natural world. Breathe. Let go. And now I invite you to return to your body. Return to your place and live. This is my part, Liberating Limits number 3, specifically about quarantine. Way back in February, when Helen and I, along with our fantastic musician Judy, sat down to talk about freedom and responsibility, we quickly moved to this idea of the limits in freedom. At that time, we had no idea how words like limits, freedom, responsibility, and heck, even Italy would sound today. How quickly words take on new meanings and new contexts, sometimes in a 24-hour period. I wonder how they sound to you today, where you are, wherever you are, as we find ourselves isolating, at least physically, in the midst of a global pandemic. Freedom and responsibility have indeed taken on new shapes. Yet, I find that Helen's reflections offer so much great wisdom for the day we find ourselves in. How might the limits on our freedom today liberate us? And I feel like I don't have an answer for you. It's actually a question that we have to live into in this time because it is so new to us. We have moved from having 360,000 cheeses in our grocery store to none. And I find with that as I talk to Americans around me, they are sensing great loss. My own daughter, this past week, we have talked, both of my daughters, in fact, especially because they don't know the full context of what's going on. They just know that their world has been upended and they don't know why, and they think everybody's freaking out. And maybe we don't need to freak out, because all they're experiencing is the fact that they have been told no, that the things that they had planned and hoped for, they're now gone. And so I find that in my conversations with them, what I'm dealing with is loss. The loss of freedoms, the loss of plans that they had hoped for. And so I think we have to acknowledge that loss, but we can't stay there. we can't stay there. We have to look beyond that loss to what are the new things that are emerging. And it's so helpful that we should have spring in this context. It's so helpful that we are going through this, and it's even frightfully surreal to have to find ourselves isolating as the whole earth is, at least right here in Summit, New Jersey, is coming alive. I mean, we just had a full moon in which it was the worm full moon, or however they call it, in which the worms are starting to move in the earth, getting the earth ready for life to explode, and yet we find limits on our freedom. And so the question is, how will it liberate us? I was thinking about the story that Reverend Robbins told this morning in service about the wisdom of her daughter. I call it the gospel according to Ella. When Ella heard that we were having an emergency, she said, Robin said to her, "Do you know what an emergency is?" And she said, "Yeah, it means stop and help everyone." And I think sometimes we get stuck on the stop and we forget the and. And that's where I find the liberation really is. And how do we help everyone? And of course, helping everyone now looks completely different than it did yesterday, because now I'm isolated. How do I help somebody when I can't go and hold their hand? How do I help someone when I can't meet them? How do I help a pandemic that is so large that I can't wrap my head around it? And I was offered this great piece of wisdom by one of our members, Suzanne Palick, who read a book called Shrink the Change by Samantha Powers. She said that when things feel too big and it feels like, what can I do? You actually have to move to the local. You have to shrink the change that you can do. And I find that piece of wisdom so liberating in this time. It helps me move out of the feeling that the freedom is a little bit the lack of freedom is claustrophobic, and moving into a place where I could actually make change in my life that would liberate me from what has come before. I think about the English woman that Helen talked about, who was moving out of the familiar constraints of England and moving into the gloriousness of Italy. And I think, what are the constraints that I had in the structure that I was living in just 2 days ago? And what might this time offer me? And the answer for me was a daily walk. Isn't that funny? In the schedule before, I had no time to go for a walk, even 15 minutes. And now, not only am I walking once a day, I'm walking throughout the day because it's the only thing I can do. What if this is the liberation we are seeking? What if this is what life becomes? Just that little thing. Are we being liberated by this pandemic? That's what I'm wondering about. So every year, at the beginning of the year, I create a collage for my year, a collage for my life. It has taken on different sizes and different shapes. Some years it's very small and simple. Other years it's loud and audacious. This year it tended more towards loud and audacious. I centered my collage around one word, clarity. And I even put it in the French form, clarité, with a little accent over the E at the end instead of the Y. After all, I am Emily in the French form with an IE at the end. I placed that word clarity, and you'll see the image in a few moments. I placed that word clarity on top of layers and layers of paper, on top of layers and layers of images, because the world that I lived in 48 hours ago felt like an overwhelming sensation of images and sounds and voices, all clamoring for my attention. I felt like that dog in the movie Up, who was constantly going, squirrel, 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 squirrel. And I never knew what to give my time to. And that this year I was seeking clarity. That is what was going to liberate me. And so I ask you to practice in the days ahead. Practice seeking clarity. Practice change in small ways. And ask yourself, how am I being liberated? How am I being liberated?
Time for our closing words. Like us, every stone, every pebble locks within it a history as old as time.
Time connects everything.
To honor that connection, we drop a pebble into the chalice. May its unspoken story ripple out into the world.
May all of our unspoken stories ripple out into the world. Be well.